My dad and stepmom laughed when they got the house and land while I got an old turtle, but soon that turtle made me $35 million. I'm Jake, 24, living in a small rental house on the outskirts of Atlanta with my fiancée Emily. Not the dream setup, but we're making it work while saving for something better. Our place is tiny, just 2 bedrooms with walls, so thin you can hear the neighbor's TV through them, but it's ours for now. I work at Patterson Construction, spending my days measuring, hammering, and dreaming about the house I'll build someday. Emily teaches 3rd grade at the local elementary school and has this crazy talent for baking that makes our little kitchen smell like heaven most weekends. We've got this running joke about our financial strategy. Whenever we pass a fancy coffee shop, Emily nudges me and whispers, "Remember, we're saving for a palace, not a pumpkin spice latte." Then we go home and make our own coffee that tastes like dirt compared to the real thing. But hey, every $5 saved is another brick in our future home, right? Some nights, we sit on our creaky porch swing and sketch floor plans on napkins. Emily always insists on a massive kitchen with an island big enough to land a plane on, while I just want a decent workshop where I can build furniture without banging my elbows on the walls. Simple dreams, but they're ours. Mom died when I was 17. Cancer took her fast, barely 6 months from diagnosis to funeral. Dad, Roy to everyone but me, was remarried before Mom's side of the bed got cold. Vivian swooped in with her designer handbags and improvements for our family home. Within months, the place I grew up in didn't feel like mine anymore. Family photos disappeared, replaced by abstract art that looked like someone sneezed paint onto canvas. Mom's garden was ripped out for a hot tub that Vivian used exactly twice before complaining it was too outdoorsy. Then came Kyle, Vivian's son from her first marriage. A year older than me, but with the maturity of a middle schooler. He'd catch me looking at old photos and sneer, "Mama's boy needs a tissue?" Real charming guy. The only place that still felt like home was Grandpa's farm, about an hour outside Atlanta. 40 acres of the prettiest land in Georgia, with rolling hills, a pond stocked with bass that practically jumped onto your hook, and oak trees so old they probably witnessed the Civil War. The farmhouse wasn't fancy, just a 2-story white clapper with a wide front porch where Grandpa would sit in his rocking chair, tap his foot to Elvis records, and sharing stories that got taller with every telling. Grandpa was something else. Korean War vet with more charm than a politician on election day. Tall and lean even in his 70s, with these massive hands that could fix anything but were gentle enough to tend his prized tomatoes. He had this way of making you feel like whatever you had to say was the most important thing he'd heard all day. My favorite memories are Thanksgiving at the farm. Grandpa teaching me how to deep fry a turkey without burning down the barn, a lesson that involved more colorful language than should be used around holiday food, while Grandma Marjorie made pecan pies from pecans we'd gathered ourselves. After Grandma passed, Grandpa kept those traditions alive, though he never could get her pie crust quite right. Too much love in her hands, he'd say. Can't measure that in a recipe. Kyle would mock me mercilessly for spending weekends at the Dirt Palace instead of hanging out at the mall or whatever suburban kids did for fun. But nothing beats sitting around a bonfire with Grandpa, listening to him talk about the stars like they were old friends who visited every night. And then there was Marge, the most magnificent sulcata tortoise you've ever seen. Grandpa got her as a hatchling back in the 80s, a gift from Grandma on their 30th anniversary. Your grandmother said she wanted to give me something that would outlive us all, just like our love. Grandpa told me once, his voice catching just a bit. She sure nailed that one. By the time I was coming around regularly, Marge was pushing 70 pounds and had her own heated shed that Grandpa built special, with a little door so she could come and go as she pleased. That tortoise had more real estate than some people I know. Marge ate like a teenager. Mountains of leafy greens, squash, and occasional pumpkin puree that Grandpa made specially for her. A lady deserves to be spoiled, he'd say with a wink. She was a local celebrity of sorts. Kids from nearby farms would ride their bikes over just to see her lumber across the yard, slow and steady as time itself. In 2015, when I was home from college for a summer break, I got it in my head that Grandpa should try investing in Bitcoin. I was taking a computer science class, and everyone was buzzing about cryptocurrency being the future. I showed up at the farm one Saturday with my laptop, all fired up about digital wallets and blockchain technology. Grandpa listened patiently, sipping his sweet tea on the porch while Marge munched clover at his feet. When I finally ran out of steam, he laughed that deep belly laugh that seemed to come all the way from his boots. "Jake, my boy," he wheezed, wiping his eyes, "you want to trade real dollars for magic internet money? I'd sooner buy premium hay from Marge here. At least I can see where that investment goes." But here's the thing about Grandpa. Beneath all that old-school charm was a mind sharp as a tack. After giving me grief, he squinted at my laptop and said, "Well, I didn't get to be this old by ignoring the future. Show me how this hocus pocus works." So we set up a wallet, and I showed him how to buy Bitcoin, explaining all the steps. I never thought he'd actually do it, just wanted him to see how the technology worked. As he wrote down the seed phrase on a piece of paper, he muttered something about tortoises being more reliable than before his voice trailed off. I helped him secure everything, thinking he was just humoring me. In my mind, this was just an educational session for a curious old-timer, not something he'd actually pursue. Emily first met Marge about 3 years ago, when Grandpa invited us for 4th of July weekend. I was nervous. Meeting the family is one thing, but meeting Grandpa and his tortoise was the real relationship test. Emily passed with flying colors. She brought homemade tortoise treats, researched online, and sat cross-legged in the grass for an hour, just watching Marge explore her territory. "She's like a dinosaur," Emily whispered, awestruck. A gentle one that survived a meteor by moving too slowly for extinction to notice her. Grandpa beamed like Emily had just paid him the highest compliment. From that moment on, they were thick as thieves. He taught her how to clean Marge's shell with a soft brush and how to recognize when the tortoise wanted affection, which, surprisingly often, involved stretching her neck out for gentle scratches. Emily even joked that Marge should be our financial advisor, since tortoises think long-term by nature. What would Marge invest in? Became our shorthand for making careful decisions. We started visiting the farm almost every weekend, with Emily bringing her notebook to sketch Marge for what she called brand research. When we open our bakery someday, she told Grandpa, Marge is going to be our logo. Slow-baked goods worth waiting for. Grandpa loved that idea so much he almost cried. Those weekends at the farm became our escape from the real world. While I helped Grandpa with repairs around the property, Emily would bake in the farmhouse kitchen, testing recipes and filling the house with smells that made my mouth water from across the yard. It felt like we were building something together, not just plans for our future, but a connection to my past. But paradise has a way of sprouting snakes. Dad started dropping hints about estate planning and liquid assets whenever Grandpa was mentioned. I knew what that meant. Vivian had her eye on the farm's value, not its legacy. She referred to it as a dirt heap too many times for me to miss her meaning. This wasn't just paranoia on my part. Grandpa had told me years ago that he'd put the farm in Dad's name, with the understanding that it would stay in the family for generations. This land has Thompson blood in every inch of soil, he'd said firmly. It's not for selling. It's for living. But whenever Dad and Vivian visited, rarely, I'd catch her eyeing the property like she was mentally subdividing it into condo lots. Kyle would trail behind, kicking at the garden beds and asking me if I was planning to become a hick farmer when Grandpa was gone. The disrespect made my blood boil, but I kept quiet for Grandpa's sake. Grandpa had this saying that I've carried with me. Life is like a tortoise, slow moving, but if you keep going without stopping, you'll get where you're meant to be. He'd tap Marge's shell gently when he said it, and she'd blink those ancient eyes like she was co-signing his wisdom. Last Memorial Day weekend, Emily and I drove down for a visit. Grandpa had been calling more frequently, sometimes just to tell me about Marge's latest adventures or to ask about that internet money. I had a feeling something was on his mind, but he wasn't ready to share it yet. While helping him clean out the old storage shed, I found a faded photograph tucked inside a cigar box. It showed a much younger Grandpa holding baby Marge's palms, Grandma laughing beside him. When I turned it over, there was an inscription in Grandpa's neat handwriting. Secrets hide where no one thinks to look. I laughed and showed it to him. What's this, Grandpa? Buried treasure map? He took the photo, studied it for a long moment, then handed it back with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Something like that, Jake. Sometimes the best treasures are right under your nose. I thought he was being sentimental, but something in his tone made the hair on my arm stand up, like he was trying to tell me something, without actually saying the words. That evening, as the fireflies started to peer over the pond, we sat on the porch watching Marge munch on dandelions in the yard. Grandpa seemed lost in thought, occasionally glancing between me and the tortoise with an expression I couldn't quite read. You know, Jake, he said finally, Marge has been with me through everything. Losing your grandma, watching you grow up, seeing the world change faster than an old man can keep up with. She's a keeper of secrets. That one. Tortoises don't gossip. I nodded, not really understanding, but sensing the weight behind his words. Just remember, he added, patting my shoulder, sometimes the most valuable things look ordinary on the outside. That's how they stay safe. As Emily and I drove home that Sunday evening, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I couldn't shake the feeling that Grandpa had been trying to tell me something important. Your grandpa seemed different today, Emily said, echoing my thoughts. More, I don't know, intentional. I nodded, watching the familiar landscape roll by. Yeah, like he was making sure I was paying attention. Emily reached over and squeezed my hand. So, when are we going to build our own farmhouse? I'm thinking wraparound porch, big yard for our own Marge Jr. someday. I laughed, the strange moment with Grandpa temporarily forgotten. One step at a time, Em. First, let's get a house with walls thicker than cardboard. As we continued toward home, I thought about what Grandpa had said about Marge being a symbol of enduring love. If he was right, if that tortoise really did represent something eternal, maybe she had some wisdom to share with us too, about patience and persistence and building something meant to last. We'll get there, I said quietly, more to myself than Emily. Slow and steady, just like Marge. 3 weeks after our visit to farm, my phone rang at 4:30 in the morning. Nobody calls at that hour with good news. The hospital's number flashed on my screen, and my stomach dropped before I even answered. Grandpa had suffered a massive stroke in his sleep. The neighbor found him when Marge wandered to their property, something she'd never done before. I broke every speed limit driving to the hospital. Emily white-knuckled in the passenger seat as I called Dad on speakerphone. The ICU was blindingly white and smelled of antiseptic and desperation. Grandpa looked small in a hospital bed, tubes and wires connecting him to machines that beeped with mechanical indifference. His weathered farmer's hands lay motionless on the stiff white sheets. The doctor spoke in that carefully measured tone they must teach in medical school, serious but not without hope. Words like critical condition and next 48 hours floated around me like debris in a flood. I nodded at appropriate intervals, but my mind was elsewhere, remembering Grandpa teaching me to fish, to change a tire, to stand up straight and look people in the eye. Dad and Vivian showed up an hour later. Dad looked genuinely shaken. Vivian wore full makeup and kept checking her watch. That first day was a blur of coffee from vending machines, uncomfortable waiting room chairs, and hushed conversations with nurses. When they finally let me see him again, I was alone. The machines had been silenced, though the lights still blinked. Grandpa's eyes fluttered open when I took his hand. "Jake," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the hospital sounds. "Take care of Marge." I assured him the neighbor was feeding her, that everything was fine, but he gripped my wrist with surprising strength. "No, listen. Marge knows more than you think. Take care of her, and she'll take care of you." I chalked it up to medication and stroke infusion, but something in his eyes looked clear and urgent. Before I could ask what he meant, his eyes drifted closed again. I sat with him until visiting hours ended, telling him about my latest construction project, pretending he could hear me. Grandpa never woke up again. He slipped away at 3:17 the next afternoon. I was holding his hand when the monitor flatlined, that horrible steady tone cutting through the room like a physical thing. A piece of me flatlined with him. The days that followed were a haze of paperwork and phone calls. Emily handled the funeral arrangements while I wandered around our apartment like a ghost, forgetting to eat until she put food in front of me. Dad seemed genuinely heartbroken, though Vivian kept bringing up practical matters when we talked. Kyle sent a generic sorry for your lost text, misspelling my name as Jack. I drove to the farm alone the day before the funeral, needing some quiet time with my memories. I knew Dad had promised to keep the farm in the family, eventually passing it down to me as Grandpa intended. But something in my gut told me things might not go according to plan. I wanted to soak in every detail of the place, while it was still undeniably Grandpa's. Marge was sunning herself in the yard, oblivious to the fact that her world had changed forever. I sat next to her, my hand on her sun-warmed shell, and cried for the first time since the hospital. She pushed her ancient head against my leg like she understood. The funeral was held at the small Baptist church, where Grandpa occasionally attended Christmas and Easter services. The parking lot overflowed with trucks and cars. It seemed like everyone in 3 counties came to pay respects. Farmers in clean but worn suits, veterans with ramrod-straight postures, ladies from the church with casseroles and gentle hands on my shoulder. I stood in a receiving line for 2 hours, listening to stories about Grandpa that ranged from hilarious to heartbreaking. The Korean War buddies who called him Lucky Thompson because of a near miss with a sniper. The neighbor whose barn he helped rebuild after a tornado. The local kids who remembered him as the tortoise man, who let them feed Marge carrots if they brought their report cards to show him. Throughout all, Vivian complained under her breath about the heat, the length of the service, the waste of a perfectly good Thursday. During the eulogy, she not so quietly asked Dad when they could address the property situation. I gripped the edge of the pew so hard my knuckles turned white. Kyle, decked out in a designer suit that looked ridiculous against the backdrop of the simple country church, spent the entire service checking his phone. After the burial, he sidled up to me with that smirk I'd grown to hate. "So, Jake, you taking that dinosaur to the zoo or what?" "I'm thinking Dad could sell that land to a developer, make a killing. They're building golf communities all over these days." I promised Emily I wouldn't cause a scene, so I just walk away, hands shaking with the effort of not planting my fist in his perfect teeth. But man, I wanted to. I wanted to tell him that the farm wasn't just real estate. It was Grandpa's legacy, his heart and soul poured into every acre. Instead, I went to find Emily, who was talking to the church ladies, graciously accepting casserole dishes we had no room for in our tiny freezer. 2 days after the funeral, we all met at Mr. Harrison's law office. Harrison was Grandpa's attorney and fishing buddy for 40 years. A sharp-eyed man with thinning white hair and bow ties that seemed anachronistic anywhere else, but somehow suited him perfectly. The office smelled of leather and old books. Vivian perched on the edge of her chair, like she was afraid of catching something from it. Kyle slouched, bored already. Dad stared at his hands. Emily sat next to me, her presence a silent support. Harrison cleared his throat and began reading the will with a somber dignity. The farm and most of Grandpa's assets went to Dad, as expected. Then Harrison's voice took on a subtle tone of amusement. "To my grandson, Jake, I leave my tortoise, Marge, and her housing structure, as she, unlike some, won't sell him down the river for a quick buck." There was uncomfortable laughter around the room. Vivian's perfectly penciled eyebrows shot up like startled caterpillars. Kyle snorted. Dad looked embarrassed. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut, not because I expected the land. I knew it would go to Dad. But because of the wording. Was Grandpa calling out Dad's intentions from beyond the grave? Why emphasize that Marge wouldn't sell me down the river, unless he suspected that's exactly what Dad might do with the farm? But as Mr. Harrison continued with smaller bequests, his fishing tackle to a neighbor, his truck to his church for their outreach program, I remembered Grandpa's words in the hospital. Marge knows more than you think. Was there something I was missing? Mr. Harrison handed me a sealed envelope after the reading. "Your grandfather asked me to give you this privately," he said quietly, his eyes communicating something I couldn't quite read. Inside was a simple note in Grandpa's handwriting. "The answer isn't always where you're looking. Sometimes it's right under your nose or your feet." Dad surprised me by suggesting Emily and I stay at the farm temporarily, while we figured out what to do with Marge. "It'll give me time to sort things out with the property anyway," he said, avoiding my eyes. I didn't like the sound of sort things out, but the chance to spend more time at the farm was too good to pass up. We moved in the following weekend, bringing just enough clothes and supplies to get by. Emily immediately started cleaning the farmhouse kitchen, while I checked on Marge's enclosure, making sure it was secure and comfortable. Being there without Grandpa felt wrong, like the heart had been torn out of place. But there was comfort in the familiar creaks of the floorboards and the view of the pond at sunset. For 2 weeks, we settled into a strange limbo. I commuted to work on the farm, wincing at the gas costs, but loving coming home to the peace of the countryside. Emily brought stacks of papers to grade and spent her afternoons on the porch, red pen in hand, occasionally looking up to watch Marge's slow progress across the yard. We cleaned out some of Grandpa's clothes, both of us tearing up over his collection of flannel shirts, worn soft from years of use. We talked about the future and hypotheticals. What if we could buy the farm from Dad? What if we turned part of it into Emily's dream bakery? What if we raised our future kids here, letting them grow up with dirt under their fingernails and stars overhead, the way I had? Then came the bombshell. Dad and Vivian showed up unannounced one Saturday morning. I was in the barn, fixing a leak in Marge's heated enclosure for the coming fall weather. Vivian stayed in the car, but Dad walked over, hands in his pockets, looking everywhere but at me. "Jake, I need to talk to you about the farm," he started, scuffing at the dirt with his city shoes. My heart sank. I knew what was coming before he said it. I've had an offer from Scenic Valley Developments. $900,000 for the whole property. They want to build a gated community. The world tilted sideways for a moment. I'd known this was coming, but hearing it out loud made me physically nauseous. "Dad, you promised Grandpa you'd keep this place in the family. He wanted it preserved, not carved up into cookie-cutter lots for rich people's second homes." Dad's face hardened. "Your grandfather lived in the past, Jake. We have to think about the future. Kyle's looking at colleges. Vivian wants to move closer to her sister Miami. And frankly, this place is just sitting here costing me property taxes. Give me time to buy it from you," I pleaded. "Emily and I can get a loan. Maybe not for the full amount, but they're ready to close in 30 days, Jake. No contingencies, no waiting for financing. It's a sure thing." So that's it. 70 years of family history bulldozed from McMansions. Dad finally met my eyes, and I saw nothing of Grandpa in him. "The deal's as good as done. You've got 2 weeks to get your stuff and your tortoise out of here." I watched him walk back to the car where Vivian waited, her face alight with triumph. They drove away in a cloud of dust, leaving me standing in the barn doorway, shaking with a rage so complete it felt like grief. Emily found me there an hour later, still staring at the dirt driveway like I could turn back time by sheer force of will. She listened without interrupting as I told her what happened, then wrapped her arms around me. "We'll figure this out, Jake. We always do." That night, we sat at the kitchen table making plans. We have to move Marge to our place in town, which meant finding a way to create a proper habitat in our postage stamp backyard. We need a truck to transport her heated shelter, which wasn't designed to be portable. And we have to leave the only place that still felt like home to me. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of packing and planning. We rented a U-Haul from Marge's shelter, which I partially disassembled to fit on the truck. Emily called in favors from her teacher friends, and we had a small army helping us clear out what we wanted to keep from the farmhouse. Dad didn't show his face again, which was probably for the best. Moving day dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect fall day that Grandpa would have spent on his tractor, getting the fields ready for winter. The irony wasn't lost on me. Getting Marge into the pickup truck was a comedy of errors that would have been hilarious under any other circumstances. She weighed north of 80 pounds and had absolutely no interest in being relocated. Emily tried luring her with pumpkin treats, while I attempted to lift her from behind. After the third time, she pulled her head and legs into her shell, becoming essentially an immovable boulder. Our neighbor Tom brought over a dolly and helped me roll her up a makeshift ramp. We secured her in the truck bed with blankets and bungee cords, creating a tortoise burrito that should have been safe for the hour-long drive to our rental house. Should have been. Halfway home, on the interstate, Marge decided she'd had enough of travel and started thrashing in her blanket cocoon. I watched in the rear-view mirror, horrified, as she worked herself dangerously close to the edge of the truck bed. Emily climbed into the back seat to keep an eye on her, giving me real-time updates like a traffic reporter. She's moving again, heading starboard, plotting an escape. Jake, pull over. I swerved onto the shoulder just as Marge made her bid for freedom. Emily lunged across the back seat and grabbed her shell before she could tumble onto the highway. We sat there on the side of I-85, cars whizzing past, with Emily half hanging out the window, clutching an indignant tortoise. When my heart rate returned to something approaching normal, we rearranged everything, this time using the tow straps from Grandpa's emergency kit to create a more secure harness. Marge glared at us. Yes, tortoises can glare for the rest of the trip. Our rental house in town had a small fenced backyard that was now dominated by Marge's shelter. We had to get special permission from our landlord, who was convinced we were bringing in some kind of farm animal, until we showed him pictures of Marge. That's not a pet, that's a dinosaur, he'd said, shaking his head but signing the amended lease anyway. Our neighbors were equally perplexed. The first time Mrs. Abernathy from next door spotted Marge cruising along the fence line, she dropped her watering can and called the police, convinced an alligator had somehow wandered into suburbia. It took Emily 20 minutes in a National Geographic article to convince her that sulcated tortoises were not, in fact, dangerous predators. The kids on our street thought Marge was the coolest thing ever. They gathered at the fence after school, watching her methodical demolition of our lawn with the fascination usually reserved for video games or YouTube stars. We became known as the Tortoise People, which was fine by me, better than being the guy who lost his grandfather's farm. That first night in our house when Marge settled in the backyard, Emily and I sat on our tiny back porch, drinking beer and looking at the stars, or what we could see of them through the city lights. It wasn't the same as the farm, where the Milky Way spread across the sky like spilled sugar. Nothing would ever be the same as the farm. What do we do now? I asked, not really expecting an answer. Emily leaned her head on my shoulder. We keep going, one day at a time. That's what your grandpa would say, right? I watched Marge slowly circling her new, much smaller territory, seeming to take it all in stride. Tortoises adapt. They've been around since the dinosaurs, surviving whatever the world throws at them. Maybe Grandpa was right, I said quietly. Maybe Marge is our good luck charm, our reminder to keep going no matter what. Emily smiled and squeezed my hand. If she starts digging up buried treasure in the backyard, I'll believe it. We sat there in comfortable silence, watching our prehistoric roommate explore her new kingdom, my grandfather's words echoing in my head. Marge knows more than you think. Little did I know how right he was. 3 weeks after settling into our suburban tortoise sanctuary, Dad called. It was the first time we'd spoken since the showdown at the farm. His voice had that forced casual tone people use when they're trying too hard to sound normal. Jake, the developers are finalizing the paperwork. We're closing the deal in 10 days. There's still some of your grandfather's personal stuff in the storage closet that I didn't have time to sort through. If you want any of it, you need to come get it this weekend before we clear everything out. I'd been expecting this call, but it still felt like a knife twist. Emily offered to come with me, but I needed to do this alone. One final goodbye to the farm before it became a construction site for cookie-cutter houses with pretentious names like the Sycamore and the Magnolia. The farm looked different already. The grass was overgrown, and someone had put up survey stakes with bright orange ribbons fluttering in the breeze. Coming soon. Scenic Valley Estate's sign stood at the entrance to the driveway. I wanted to run it over with my truck. Dad met me at the farmhouse, maintaining a careful, neutral expression. He gestured to a cardboard box on the porch. That's most of it. Some records, his old dog tags, a few photographs. I left his clothes at Goodwill. I couldn't even look at him. Thanks, I muttered, picking up the box. It was lighter than I expected, as if a man's entire life should weigh more somehow. Jake, Dad started, his voice hesitant. I know you're upset about the farm, but don't. I cut him off. Just don't. You made your choice. I walked back to my truck, the box clutched to my chest, ignoring whatever he called after me. The past was being bulldozed away, and there was nothing I could do about it. Or so I thought. Back home, Emily helped me sort through the box on our living room floor. Grandpa's vinyl Elvis collection, every album from Elvis Presley to Moody Blue, his battered leather wallet, still containing his fishing license and a faded photo of Grandma, his Korean War dog tags, the metal worn smooth from decades of handling, and at the bottom, a sealed envelope with my name written in his shaky handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of notebook paper with 5 words, "Trust Marge, my best hiding place." Emily read it over my shoulder and frowned. "What do you think he meant?" I shook my head. No idea. Grandpa loved his riddles. We played Love Me Tender on our portable record player, one of the few Elvis songs Emily could tolerate, and brought the records outside where Marge was soaking up the late afternoon sun. It felt right somehow, like Grandpa was there with us, tapping his foot to music, while Marge did her slow-motion patrol of our tiny yard. "We should clean her shell," Emily suggested. "Your grandpa always said it was important for their health." I fetched the soft brush and shell conditioner from the supplies we'd brought from a farm. Grandpa had been so particular about Marge's care routine that I'd made sure to grab all her maintenance items when we moved her. It was one of the few times I've been thankful for his obsessive tortoise care lectures. As Elvis crooned about tender love, Emily and I took turns gently brushing Marge's shell. The familiar activity brought a lump to my throat. Muscle memory had me reaching for the old tin cup Grandpa used to rinse the shell, expecting to hear his gravelly voice explaining for the 100th time why shell care mattered. "You're doing great, Marge," Emily murmured, as the tortoise stretched her wrinkled neck in contentment. "Your grandpa will be proud, Jake." I was focused on a particular section of Marge's carapace when something caught my eye, faint markings that I'd never noticed before. At first, I thought they were just natural variations in the shell pattern, but as I looked closer, they seemed almost deliberate. "And do you see this?" I pointed to what looked like tiny etched lines on one of the large scuts near the back of Marge's shell. Emily leaned in, squinting. "Are those letters?" I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, angling it to create shadows that made the markings stand out. Sure enough, there were characters etched so faintly you'd never notice, unless you were specifically looking for them. "What the hell?" I muttered, trying to make sense of the pattern. Did someone carve graffiti into my tortoise? Emily's eyes suddenly widened. "Jake, these aren't random marks. This looks like a seed phrase." My brain took a moment to catch up. "A what?" "A seed phrase. For Bitcoin. Remember how you showed your grandpa how to set up a wallet? These look like the recovery words." Emily had gotten into crypto briefly during college. Nothing serious, just enough to understand the basics. I stared at the markings in disbelief. The memory of that summer day in 2015 came rushing back, showing Grandpa how to set up a wallet, him muttering about tortoises being reliable. Had he actually used Marge's shell as a high-tech hiding place? "Holy shit," I whispered, tracing the faint letters with my fingertip. "Grandpa, you crafty old man." Emily was already grabbing her laptop. "Let's see if we can read all of them. Some are really faint." For the next hour, we carefully photographed Marge's shell from different angles, using various lighting to highlight the etched words. Marge endured our attention with typical tortoise patience, occasionally stretching her neck for a piece of romaine lettuce Emily offered as a reward. "This is insane," I kept saying. Grandpa turned Marge into a crypto wallet. A living, breathing safe. Emily laughed. "Marge, you're either a genius or the world's slowest hacker." I joined in. Maybe she can do our taxes next year too? Once we had clear images of all the markings, we sat at the kitchen table and pieced together the seed phrase. 12 words, etched so carefully they blended perfectly with the natural patterns of Marge's shell. No wonder I'd never noticed them before. You have to be looking specifically for them or cleaning the shell very carefully to spot the difference. "Okay," Emily said, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Moment of truth. Let's see if this actually works. My heart pounded as she entered the recovery phrase into the wallet software. I didn't want to get my hopes up. For all we knew, this was just Grandpa's idea of a practical joke, or he'd transferred the funds years ago. There might be nothing but digital dust in that wallet. The screen processed for what felt like forever. And then numbers appeared. 350 Bitcoin. I blinked. Sure, I was misreading. Is that? Emily's mouth had fallen open. Jake, that's 350 Bitcoin. That can't be right, I stammered. Let me see. But there was in black and white, 350 BTC. At current rates, about $100,000 per Bitcoin in 2025. That was $35 million. $35 million. My mind flashed back to that summer day. Grandpa pretending to humor me about magic internet money. I'd helped him set up the wallet, showed him how to secure it, never believing for a second he'd actually invest. The sneaky old fox had apparently taken my advice to heart, sunk a significant chunk of money into Bitcoin, and then, in true Grandpa fashion, found the most unique storage method possible. I sank into a chair, legs suddenly unable to support me. He actually did it. He bought Bitcoin, and he hid the keys on Marge's shell. Emily was typing frantically, checking the transaction history. Looks like he bought it in several batches throughout 2015 and early 2016, right after you showed him how. Bitcoin was trading between $200 to $400 during that period. Grandpa must have invested a significant amount of his savings on a digital currency most people his age thought was a scam, then kept it secret for nearly a decade. I don't believe it, I said, staring at Marge, who was now contentedly munching on a piece of squash, completely unaware she was carrying millions of dollars on her back. All those times he asked me about that internet money, he was checking on his investment. Emily's face suddenly turned serious. Jake, are you going to tell your dad about this? The question hit me like a bucket of cold water. Dad, would I tell him about this windfall, this last surprise from Grandpa? My first instinct was yes. It was the right thing to do. But then I remembered Dad ready to sell the farm without a second thought. Vivian planning a vacation home in Miami. The developer's sign already at the end of the driveway. The broken promise to keep the property in the family. He gave Marge to me. I said slowly, specifically to me, the will made that very clear. And he had the seed phrase on her shell, where only someone who really cared for her would find it. Emily nodded. Marge is legally yours according to the will, and obviously anything attached to her is yours too. We sat in silence for a long minute, the implications sinking in. The same dad who couldn't honor his promise to his own father was now closing a deal to erase our family's heritage for a payday. Meanwhile, Grandpa had secretly arranged for me to receive something far more valuable than I could have imagined. What would you do? I asked Emily finally. She took her time answering, which was one of the things I loved about her. Emily never rushed important decisions. I think, she said carefully, that your grandfather wanted you to have this. He put the seed phrase on Marge for a reason, and your dad already made his choice when he decided to sell the farm. I knew she was right. This wasn't about revenge or greed. This was Grandpa's final gift, his way of ensuring that at least one part of his legacy would continue the way he intended. Let's cash out a small portion, I suggested, just to make sure this is real and to give us some breathing room. The rest we can hold on to. It might be worth even more in the future. Emily agreed, and we spent the next few hours setting up accounts and moving 50 Bitcoin, about $5 million, to a more accessible platform. It felt surreal, like we were playing a game with Monopoly money. But the confirmation emails kept coming, and by midnight, we had initiated a transfer that would put serious money in our bank account. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about Grandpa and his tortoise and the incredible foresight he'd had. Had he somehow known that Dad would break his promise? Had he planned this all along as a backup? The next morning, I sat with Marge in the backyard, watching her methodically demolish a head of romaine lettuce. You knew all along, didn't you? I said to her, carrying around millions while we worried about making rent. Marge blinked her ancient eyes at me and continued chewing. Tortoises don't rush, and they don't worry about tomorrow. They just keep moving forward at their own pace. The bank called 3 days later to verify the large deposit. The money was real. We had access to it. I kept checking the account on my phone, expecting it to disappear, but there it was, enough money to change our lives completely. Emily and I spent the weekend in deep discussion about what to do next. The obvious choice was to buy a house. Our dream had always been to own our own place, but now we could do so much more. We should invest most of it, Emily said sensibly. Make it work for us long term. But I couldn't stop thinking about the farm, about the pond where I'd learned to swim, the trees I climbed as a kid, the fields where Grandpa had taught me to drive a tractor. All of it about to be carved up and covered in vinyl-sided houses with 2 small yards and neighbors who would never know the history beneath their feet. What if we bought back the farm? I said suddenly. Emily looked up from her notebook where she'd been drafting a financial plan. Is that even possible? Your dad already has a deal with the developers. They haven't closed yet. I pointed out. Dad said they're finalizing the paperwork. But the deal isn't done. What if we offer more? Not all of it. That would be crazy, but enough to make Dad reconsider. She studied my face. Is that what you really want? To go back to the farm? I nodded, surprising myself at how certain I felt. It's not just about what I want. It's about what Grandpa wanted. He loved that land. He never wanted it sold off for development. And now, thanks to him, we might be able to keep his wish alive. Emily smiled that slow, thoughtful smile that always made my heart skip. Poetic justice, using the Bitcoin windfall to save the farm. We could still do some of the other things. I added quickly. Set aside money for our future. Maybe even that bakery you've always wanted. But the farm, that feels like what we're supposed to do with this gift. We stayed up late again, running numbers, researching what it would take to manage the property, dreaming bigger dreams than we'd ever allowed ourselves before. By morning, we had a rough plan. If we offer $1.5 million, that's a lot more than developers, Emily calculated. Your dad would be crazy to turn that down. I was absolutely confident Dad would take the offer. Money talks, after all, and we'd be offering substantially more than the developers. With that much extra cash on the table, it was practically a done deal. And if it worked, we'd be honoring Grandpa's memory in the best way possible. You know what this means, Emily said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. If we pull this off, Marge gets to go home. The tortoise in question was sunning herself by the fence, oblivious to the life-changing discussions happening around her. I looked at her with new appreciation, not just as Grandpa's beloved pet, but as the unlikely guardian of our future. Grandpa always said that the real treasures aren't things you can hold in your hand, but the things you hold in your heart. I mused, watching Marge's slow, deliberate movements. But I gotta say, $35 million in Bitcoin doesn't hurt either. Emily laughed and leaned her head on my shoulder. So we're doing this? We're really going to try to buy back the farm. I wrapped my arm around her, feeling more certainty than I had in months. Yeah, we're doing this. If we get the farm back, it'll be the best revenge possible. And the best gift to your grandfather's memory, Emily added softly. Marge continued her leisurely patrol of the yard, carrying millions in cryptocurrency on her ancient shell, while we planned how to reclaim the legacy that should have never been for sale in the first place. Grandpa would have loved the irony. The tortoise that everyone underestimated, slowly but surely saving the day. Slow and steady really does win a race. The morning after we decided to buy back the farm, I called Mr. Harrison. His secretary seemed surprised to hear from me so soon after the will reading, but she put me through immediately. Jake Thompson, what can I do for you, son? Harrison's voice had that particular warmth reserved for people who've known you since you were knee-high to a grasshopper. I took a deep breath. Mr. Harrison, I'd like to buy my grandfather's farm, the one my dad is selling to developers. There was a pause, then a low chuckle. Well, now that's interesting. You got the funds for something like that? Yes, sir, I do. And I need your help to make it happen without my dad knowing it's me buying it. Another pause. Your grandfather would be proud. Come to my office tomorrow morning, 9 sharp. And Jake, bring all the documentation you have for these funds. Emily went with me to Harrison's office, both of us dressed in our Sunday best, as if somehow looking professional would make our wild plan more legitimate. Mr. Harrison listened without interrupting as I explained about the Bitcoin, showing him the wallet balance on my laptop. If he was surprised by our newfound wealth, he didn't show it, just nodded and took notes in his precise handwriting. "So you want to create a shell company to purchase the property without your father knowing it's you," he summarized, leaning back in his chair. "And you want to offer more than the developers." "That's right," I confirmed. "Can you help us?" A slow smile spread across his face. "Jake, I've been practicing law in this county for 43 years. I've helped your family through 3 generations. And let me tell you something. I've been waiting for someone to play chess with Roy Thompson since he married that woman." And just like that, Operation Homecoming was born. Mr. Harrison moved with remarkable efficiency for a man in his 70s. By the end of the week, we had established Tortoise Holdings, LLC, a property investment company with Emily and me as silent partners and Harrison as the public face. We set up the necessary bank accounts, transferred funds, and prepared all the paperwork. "Now, timing is critical," Harrison explained, sipping his ever-present black coffee. "Roy mentioned they're closing with the developers in a few days. We need to make our offer immediately, and it needs to be substantial enough that your father can't afford to refuse it. We settled on $1.3 million, $300,000 more than the developer's final offer. It was a ridiculous overpayment for rural Georgia farmland. But this wasn't about market value. This was about family heritage. This was about keeping a promise." Harrison called Roy that afternoon, while Emily and I sat in his office, barely breathing. The call was on speakerphone, but Harrison signaled us to remain silent. "Roy, Bill Harrison here. I have a client interested in your father's property. They're prepared to offer $1.3 million. Cash deal. Close it within 2 weeks." The silence on the other end was so long, I thought the call had dropped. Then, "Bill, I've already got a deal in process with Scenic Valley. They've raised their offer to an even million." Harrison didn't miss a beat. "My clients are prepared to wire a $50,000 non-refundable deposit today as a show of good faith. The remaining $1.25 million at closing." Another long pause. "Who's the buyer, Bill?" "Tortoise Holdings, LLC. They're looking at several properties in the area for a tourism development. Your father's place fits their criteria perfectly." I could almost hear the wheels turning in Dad's head, calculating how to break the news to the developers without burning bridges. After all, Scenic Valley was a big player in the area. He might want to do business with them again someday. "I'd need to see proof of funds before I walk away from a solid deal," Dad said finally. "Check your email in 5 minutes," Harrison replied smoothly. "And Roy, my clients need an answer by close of business today." After hanging up, Harrison looked at us with twinkling eyes. "Now we wait. And if I know your father, he'll call Vivian immediately to tell her about the extra $300,000. Sure enough, Dad called back just before 5 p.m. He was trying to sound casual, but I could hear the excitement in his voice. "Bill, I've reviewed the offer with my wife. We're prepared to accept. Have your clients send over the contracts." And just like that, the farm was coming back to us. I felt dizzy with the reality of it. Emily squeezed my hand so hard it hurt, but I barely noticed. Mr. Harrison winked at us as he finalized details with Dad. After hanging up, Harrison told us that during a separate conversation, he'd heard Vivian gloating in the background. "Those suckers are overpaying by at least $500,000. Kyle's going to have the biggest pool in Miami." I laughed until tears rolled down my face. If she only knew who the suckers really are. The next 2 weeks were a blur of paperwork, inspections, and nervous anticipation. What if Dad somehow discovered our scheme? What if the developers countered with an even higher offer? What if the Bitcoin market crashed before we could complete the transaction? But everything went smoothly. Harrison was a master, keeping all communication flowing through his office and creating just enough corporate documentation to make Tortoise Holdings LLC look legitimate without revealing too much information. The day of closing, Emily and I sat in Harrison's back office while he met with Dad and Vivian in the conference room. through the thin walls. We could hear the scratching of pens on paper and Vivian's too loud laugh as she presumably thought about all the things she could buy with the unexpected windfall. When Harrison finally opened the door and ushered us into the conference room, Dad and Vivian had already left with their check. On the conference table sat a single key with a hand-carved wooden tortoise keychain that Grandpa had made years ago. "Congratulations," Harrison said, pushing the key toward me. "You are now the proud owners of the Thompson family farm." I picked up the key, the familiar weight of it in my palm bringing back a flood of memories. How many times had Grandpa handed me this same key when I came to visit? How many times had I watched him lock up the barn at night, the tortoise keychain swinging from his gnarled fingers? "Thank you," I managed, my voice thick. "What do we owe you for all this?" Harrison waved away the question. "Your grandfather was one of my oldest friends. He'd be tickled pink to know I helped you pull this off. Consider it my gift to him." As we walked to the truck, Emily asked, "How long before we tell your dad it was us?" I grinned. "Let's wait until after the wedding. I want to see his face when he realizes his son is his former landlord." We drove straight to the farm. Our farm now, barely speaking, each lost in our own thoughts. The "coming soon" development sign was still at the entrance. I stopped the truck, got out, and yanked it from the ground, tossing in the truck bed with more satisfaction than I'd felt in months. The farmhouse looked empty and slightly neglected after just a few weeks without care. Fallen leaves had gathered on the porch, and the flower beds Grandma had lovingly tended for decades were overgrown with weeds. But the bones of the place were strong, waiting for us to breathe life back into them. We walked through each room, making plans. The kitchen needed updating if Emily was going to use it for her baking. The old spare bedroom would make a perfect office. The bathroom, well, the less said about the 1970s avocado fixtures, the better. Outside, we walked property line, just as Grandpa and I had done countless times. The pond still teemed with fish jumping at dusk. The old oak trees still stood sentinel along the driveway. And the barn, Marge's home, waited patiently for her return. "I can't believe we actually did it," Emily said, her arm linked through mine, as we watched the sunset from Grandpa's porch rockers. "This is really ours now." Thanks to Grandpa's crazy Bitcoin gamble and Marge's shell, I agreed. Speaking of which, we need to bring her home tomorrow. That night, we slept on an air mattress in the living room, too excited to drive back to our rental. I lay awake long after Emily fell asleep, listening to the familiar creaks and sighs of the old house, feeling Grandpa's presence in every corner. The next day, we rented another U-Haul, and once again faced the challenge of tortoise transportation. This time, Marge seemed to sense she was going home. She practically walked up the ramp herself, settling into her travel nest with minimal fuss. The drive back to the farm felt like a victory parade. When we released her in the barnyard, Marge did something I'd never seen before. She circled the entire perimeter of her old territory, stopping at each landmark as if checking that everything was still in order. Then she headed straight for her favorite sunning spot beside the old oak tree and settled in as if she'd never left. "She remembers," Emily said softly. "She knows she's home." Over the next few weeks, we split our time between getting the farmhouse habitable again and figuring out what to do with our newfound wealth and property. We had far more land than we needed for just the two of us, and the inheritance came with responsibility. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching Marge's sunset patrol, Emily said, "What if we created something here? Something that honors your grandfather and shares this place with others." The idea took root instantly. We stayed up late into the night, brainstorming what would eventually become Marge's retreat, a place where people could escape the city, reconnect with nature, and experience the simple joys that had shaped my childhood. We invested a chunk of our Bitcoin fortune into renovating the farmhouse and building 5 charming cabins around the property, each with a perfect view of either the pond or the rolling fields. We refurbished the old barn into a gathering space, complete with a commercial kitchen for Emily's baking classes and farm-to-table dinners. 6 months of nonstop work later, we were ready for our soft opening. Our concept was simple but appealing: a nostalgic retreat where guests could fish in a stocked pond, hike through its untouched by development, gather eggs from our small chicken coop, and then each day with sunset bonfires where we'd serve Emily's fresh-baked pies and tell stories under the stars. And of course, there was Marge, the undisputed star of property. We built her a special viewing area where visitors could safely observe her, learn about tortoise conservation, and occasionally, under strict supervision, offer her approved treats. Children were particularly enchanted by her prehistoric appearance and gentle demeanor. We hired local staff, partnered with nearby farms for produce, and created an experience that captured the essence of Grandpa's hospitality and wisdom. Every cabin featured hand-carved wooden tortoises as part of the decor, and the main lodge displayed enlarged photographs of Grandpa with Marge throughout the years. Our marketing was simple: a website showcasing the natural beauty of the property, a catchy tagline, "Slow down, breathe deep, live like a tortoise," and a logo featuring Marge's distinctive silhouette. We targeted stressed-out city dwellers from Atlanta who were looking for an authentic country experience without roughing it too much. To our amazement, we booked solid for our first 3 months within days of launching the website. It turned out that plenty of people were willing to pay premium prices for a homemade pie, starry skies, and a chance to meet a tortoise with a personality bigger than her shell. We kept our identities as the owners of Tortoise Holdings, LLC, completely secret. The locals knew us as a young couple who bought the old Thompson place, but they didn't know we were a mysterious LLC that had outbid the developers. We figured we'd reveal the truth eventually, but for now, we enjoyed our little secret. The first year of Marge's retreat exceeded all our expectations. We expanded from summer operations to year-round, adding fall harvest festivals, winter cabin retreats with comfort food cooking classes, and spring wildflower tours. Emily's bakery classes became so popular we had to add extra sessions, and her pecan pie won the county fair blue ribbon that Grandma had claimed for years. We reinvested much of our profit back into the local community, establishing a scholarship fund for rural kids interested in sustainable agriculture or culinary arts. We named it the Marjorie Thompson Memorial Scholarship, after both Grandma and our tortoise benefactor. As for Marge, she took to her celebrity status with typical tortoise dignity. On warm days, she held court in her special garden, accepting offerings of organic produce from adoring fans and posing for countless photographs. We even created a special Marge Cam on our website so regular visitors could check in on her between trips. Emily's favorite part of our new life was what she called tortoise philosophy time. Every evening, after the guests had retired to their cabins, we'd sit with Marge during her evening lettuce snack and reflect on the day. "Your grandpa had it right," Emily said one such evening, as fireflies began to appear over the pond. "A real home isn't just about the building or the land. It's about where your heart is. And my heart is here, with you and this quirky tortoise who changed our lives." I watched Marge methodically working her way through a romaine leaf, the same way she'd done for decades before us, and would continue doing for decades after we were gone. There was something comforting in her constancy, her unflappable tortoise determination. "Grandpa used to say that tortoises teach us the most important lesson in life," I said. "They remind us that it's not about how fast you go, but about persisting when the path gets tough. They're survivors because they never quit." We sat in comfortable silence as darkness settled around us, the chorus of frogs and crickets providing nature's soundtrack. In just a few hours, we'd be up again, baking bread for breakfast, preparing fishing gear for guests, living the life we'd never imagined possible a year ago. "We should start planning our wedding," Emily said suddenly. "Right here, with Marge as a guest of honor." I grinned, picturing our tortoise friend dressed in a tiny bow tie for the occasion. Marge in wedding attire? Now that's an Instagram moment waiting to happen. As summer turned to fall, our business continued to thrive. We added a small gift shop selling Marge-themed merchandise, with a portion of proceeds going to tortoise conservation, expanded our culinary program to include farm-to-table dinners using ingredients grown in Grandma's revitalized garden, and even started hosting corporate retreats for companies looking to inspire creativity in their teams. Each new venture succeeded beyond our expectations, as if blessed by Grandpa's approval from beyond. We work harder than we'd ever worked before, but it never felt like a burden. This was our heritage, Our future, our way of honoring the past while building something new. One evening, as we sat on the porch planning our spring wedding, Emily looked out over the property where guests were gathering for the nightly bonfire and said, "I wonder what Vivian will say when she sees the invitation with Marge's picture on it." I laughed, imagining her expression. Something tells me she might suddenly develop a tortoise allergy. As the stars appeared overhead, I felt a deep sense of contentment that had nothing to do with our bank account and everything to do with the legacy we were building. Grandpa had taught me that wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in moments, in connections, in finding where you belong. And thanks to one very special tortoise, we had found exactly that. After months of planning, our wedding day finally arrived. We'd chosen to hold it at Marge's retreat, which had become one of the most popular getaway spots in the county over the past year. Nobody except Emily and I, and Mr. Harrison, of course, knew that we were actually the mysterious owners of Tortoise Holdings, LLC. The secret had been eating me alive, but I'd held on to it, knowing the perfect moment for the big reveal was coming. The May weather blessed us with clear skies and just enough breeze to keep everyone comfortable. Wildflowers dotted the meadows, and the event pavilion we'd built last winter was decorated with string lights and mason jars filled with local blooms. Everything looked exactly as Emily had envisioned during those late nights of planning after our regular guests had gone to bed. I stood greeting guests at the entrance, trying to keep my nerves in check, not wedding jitters. Emily and I had been solid since day one, but anticipation about the bomb I was about to drop on my family. When Dad's SUV pulled into the parking area, my heart rate doubled. Dad stepped out first, then turned to help Vivian, who was struggling with her ridiculous heels in the gravel. Kyle emerged last, already looking bored and checking his phone. None of them knew this was Grandpa's farm yet. The invitation had simply stated Marge's retreat with directions. The exact moment Dad realized where he was standing was priceless. His eyes widened as he took in a familiar landscape, now transformed with cabins and walkways, but still unmistakably the Thompson family farm. "This is your grandfather's farm," he said, confusion evident in his voice. "They're letting you have your wedding here?" "It's called Marge's Retreat now," I replied, keeping my face neutral. "Beautiful place, isn't it?" Vivian was already scanning the property with calculating eyes. "My goodness! Whoever bought this place certainly improved it. These cabins must bring in quite a profit." She turned to Dad with a self-satisfied smile. "We sold at exactly the right time, didn't we, Roy?" I bit my tongue and directed them toward the ceremony area, where guests were already finding their seats. The big reveal would come later, at the reception. I'd waited this long. I could wait a few more hours. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of emotion. Emily appeared at the end of the aisle in her vintage-inspired dress, looking so beautiful that everything else faded away for a moment. We exchanged vows under an arbor built from what's salvaged from Grandpa's old workshop, while Marge watched from a special viewing area nearby, wearing a custom bow tie for the occasion. During the cocktail hour, I overheard Vivian bragging to some distant relatives about how they'd made such a smart investment decision by selling the farm when they did. "The property values in this area have skyrocketed," she said, gesturing expansively. The timing couldn't have been better. Kyle, meanwhile, was working his way through the open bar while making snarky comments about the venue. "Of all the places to get married, you picked Grandpa's old farm? Talk about living in the past," he said, sloshing his bourbon. "You got the turtle, Dad got the cash. Seems fair." At the reception, guests found their seats at tables named after different turtle species. The catering staff served Grandpa's favorite foods with Emily's gourmet upgrades: fried chicken with truffle honey, shrimp and grits with heirloom tomatoes, and peach cobbler made with fruit from trees Grandpa had planted decades ago. I watched Dad take it all in, a strange mix of emotions playing across his face. He seemed uncomfortable, like the ghost of his broken promise was sitting right next to him at the table. Good. Let him squirm a little. The moment for toast arrived, and after the best man and maid of honor said their pieces, it was my turn. I stood up, champagne glass in hand, my heart pounding like a jackhammer. "I want to thank everyone for coming today." I began scanning the room until my eyes landed on Dad and Vivian. "This place means everything to us. My grandfather built this farm from nothing, poured his life into this land, and dreamed it would stay in the family forever. I paused, taking a sip of champagne for dramatic effect. So, when my father decided to sell to developers, I was heartbroken. The room went quiet. Dad shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Vivian's smile froze on her face. But then something amazing happened. I continued. My grandfather left me a gift, one hidden in the most unlikely place. I gestured toward Marge's special enclosure near the dance floor. That gift made it possible for Emily and me to create Tortoise Holdings, LLC, and buy back the farm that should have never left our family. The collective gasp was everything I'd hoped for. Vivian's champagne glass froze halfway to her lips. Dad's jaw physically dropped. Kyle choked on his drink. Around them, local guests who had known the Thompson family for generations began to murmur and turn to stare. "So I'd like to propose a toast," I said, raising my glass. "To my grandfather, who taught me that sometimes the slowest path is the surest one. To Emily, who believed in this dream when it seemed impossible. And to Marge, the tortoise who saved our family legacy." The applause was thunderous, with many guests standing. Old friends of Grandpa's were wiping away tears, nodding their approval. My family table, meanwhile, looked like a museum of frozen expressions. Before anyone could respond, one of the waiters passing by our family table accidentally let slip, "Congratulations again on a successful first year, Mr. Thompson. Everyone on staff is so proud to work for you and Mrs. Thompson." If the room was quiet before, now it was dead silent. Vivian's face went from shock to livid in seconds. "You tricked us," she hissed, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "You deliberately deceived us." I leaned forward slightly. "No, Vivian. You deceive yourselves, selling my grandfather's dream for a quick profit." Dad hadn't said anything yet. He just stared at me, then at the property around us, apparently connecting all the dots in his head. Vivian wasn't finished, though. "This is fraud," she insisted, her voice rising. "We could take legal action." I couldn't help but laugh. "For what exactly? Paying you more than the property was worth? Please, go right ahead and explain that to a judge." Kyle, surprisingly, started laughing too. "He got us good, didn't he? Damn, little brother, I didn't think you had it in you." Vivian stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Roy, we're leaving. Now." Before Dad could respond, something unexpected happened. Marge, apparently inspired by all the excitement, had somehow worked the latch of her viewing area open with her persistent beak. She was now making a determined march directly toward the dance floor, moving with more purpose than I'd ever seen from her. Guests began pointing and laughing as the tortoise paraded down between the tables like she was meant to be part of the wedding procession. Emily burst out laughing. "Look at Marge. She definitely wants to dance." The band, taking the cue, started playing a slow tune. The tension broke as everyone, including Kyle, cracked up at the tortoise's perfect timing. Everyone except Vivian, who was already heading for the exit. Dad hesitated, looking between his wife and me. "I need to talk to Jake," he said firmly. "Alone." Vivian stormed out, Kyle trailing behind after giving me a surprisingly respectful nod. Dad followed me outside to Grandpa's porch, where we sat in the same rocking chairs where I'd spent countless evenings listening to old stories and life lessons. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The sound of the reception drifted through the open windows. Music, laughter, the celebration continuing without us. "I should be furious with you," Dad said finally. "Are you?" He sighed, looking out over property, now transformed but still carrying Grandpa's spirit in every acre. "No. Impressed, actually, and ashamed." I waited, letting the night sounds fill the silence between us. Crickets chirped in the distance, a sound that had been the soundtrack to my childhood summers on this very porch. "I broke my promise to your grandfather," Dad continued, his voice rough. "I knew how much this place meant to him, to you, but Vivian, she has a way of making her priorities become everyone else's." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was the most honest thing my father had said to me in years. He would have been so disappointed in me. Dad said, "But he would be proud of you. What you've done here, it's something special." I felt some of my anger melting away, like ice in the Georgia sun. "It's not too late to remember what family means," I said finally. Dad nodded slowly. "You've built something good here, something that honors him." We sat in silence for a while longer, the weight of unspoken thoughts hanging between us. Finally, Dad stood. "I should get Vivian home before she starts calling lawyers," he said, with the ghost of a smile. "But Jake, I'd like to come back sometime. See what you've done with the place. Maybe bring my fishing gear." It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was a start. "The bass are still biting in the pond," I said, "just like when Grandpa taught us." Dad left, but the party continued with even more energy than before. Local guests were thrilled that the Thompson farm had stayed in the family after all, and the celebration lasted well into the night. Marge became the unofficial star of the reception, holding court near the dance floor, accepting lettuce offerings from tipsy well-wishers. Later, when most guests had departed and Emily and I swayed alone under the stars, she whispered, "Do you think your grandfather somehow planned all this?" The Bitcoin, the seed phrase on Marge's shell, it's like he knew what would happen. I thought about it, remembering Grandpa's cryptic comments, his careful instructions about caring for Marge, his insistence that I learn about cryptocurrency that summer. "Maybe not exactly this," I said, "but he always planted seeds for the future. That's what good ancestors do." 1 year later, on our first anniversary, Emily and I sat on the dock by the pond, watching the sunset paint the water gold. Between us, Marge munched contentedly on dandelion greens, while our 3-month-old daughter Marjorie slept peacefully in her carrier. Dad had visited twice that year, each time staying a little longer, slowly rebuilding our relationship brick by brick. He'd even fixed up Grandpa's old fishing boat and taken it out on the pond. Vivian never came with him, but that was probably for the best. Marge's retreat had expanded to include 10 cabins, with a 6-month waiting list for reservations. Emily's baking classes had been featured in Southern Living magazine, and we were breaking ground on a new event space for weddings and family reunions. But the most valuable things we'd built weren't physical structures. They were the moments shared with guests who left the retreat refreshed and reconnected. The scholarships we'd funded for local kids. The community we'd created among our staff and neighbors. The family traditions we were passing down to little Marjorie, who already showed signs of inheriting her namesake's determination. "What do you think Grandpa would say if he could see all this?" Emily asked, leaning her head on my shoulder. I watched as Marge slowly made her way toward the water's edge, steady and unhurried, just as she'd done for decades before any of us were here and would continue to do long after we were gone. He'd probably say something like, "Life is like a tortoise, slow, sometimes difficult, but if you keep loving what matters, it'll always lead you home." As if in agreement, Marge turned her ancient head toward us, blinking serenely in the fading light. In that moment, I felt the circle complete itself, past, present, and future connected through one extraordinary tortoise and the invisible threads of family love that, like Marge herself, proved resilient enough to survive almost anything. The Bitcoin fortune that had made it all possible was just a tool, a means to an end. The real inheritance from Grandpa was what he taught me about persistence, about keeping promises, about holding tight to the things that matter most. And as the first stars appeared overhead, with my wife and daughter beside me and our tortoise friend standing guard, I knew with absolute certainty that I was exactly where I was meant to be, home, in every sense of the word.